What's up, guys? Jesse DeRozier here with Hydrilla Gorilla Guide Service on Lake Guntersville. This is week 6 of my new series entitled What's on the Deck. So we're going to go through and discuss what lures we threw during our guide trips this week on Lake Guntersville, and if at all, what changes we actually made compared to last week. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. As it has been for the last several weeks that I've been doing this, it has been primarily an A-rig on these bait balls. The bait balls are working their ways out of the creek right now, or out off the flats, working their way back to the main lake. So if you were to look at the main lake body of water, the first third of the creek, as you're working your way into the creek, seems to be where the vast majority of the bait is located at. You'll find them suspended out in the middle, either on a creek channel bend or on points. So if you've got side imaging on the front of your boat, 360 or live, you can get out there and move around with your trolling motor and be able to pick up these bait balls and make adjustments in order to be able to find these fish that are schooling underneath the bait. And for the ones that are schooling underneath the bait, has been a really good choice to go with the A-rig. The second to that has been a deeper diving jerkbait. Take a deep diving jerkbait, throw it beyond the school of bait, and work it down below the actual bait fish if you can. You'll see them on live. Sometimes they're running right through the middle of the bait, and I've even seen them positioned above the bait, but the vast majority do feed from underneath. And that deeper diving jerkbait definitely has been the way to go as far as that's concerned. An option as well for those that are schooling has been just a jig head minnow. Taking that out and working it around the schools of bait, or for single fish. A lot of guys are out scoping right now and doing very, very well on this body of water, going out there and chasing a single fish. Those fish right now are willing to chase. They are fattening up for winter, and that being the case, when you get it around one, they're definitely willing to eat. The options as far as the bait balls with fish running above the bait balls, that's not maybe 20% of the time that you're going to run into that. Most of the time they're feeding from underneath, but every once in a while you'll see them actually directly over the tops of the bait balls. And in that instance, I'm still running the same underspin that Producer Swim Baits is a 3.5 on a flashy swimmer. That's a 1/4 ounce flashy swimmer hook, and taking that and running it essentially on the shallow flats. If you can still find fish that are up there, is also another way to go. But those bait balls, if the fish are high in a water column, that definitely seems to be a very good choice. If they're a little bit deeper, and I have found sometimes they shy away from that A-rig, and if they're doing that and I can't get them on the jerkbait, then I'm going with just a traditional underspin. This one here is a Picasso. It's got a very soft harness that allows for that blade to run underneath. That one I have done really well on in the last week, and I'm throwing a little bit smaller profile swim bait on that right now, and the reason for that is so that I can work it a little bit deeper. I want to be able to get that down under the bait and get to those fish if they're not high in the water column. Now, that being the case, when I am trying to get low in the water column, sometimes these fish, when they're at rest and they're not physically schooling, they're setting completely down on the bottom. And for that, I've got 3 techniques that I've been using to catch those fish. One is a blade bait, a little metal style blade bait, and taking it and essentially doing short hops, lifting it maybe 6 to 9 inches up off the bottom. Just about the time you feel it start thumping, let it drop. Pull it up, let it drop. So you're doing a lift and fall, As it's falling, I'm basically letting it almost free fall, but I'm kind of taking up my line at the same time so that I'm somewhat in contact still on a semi-taut line, so that if it gets hit on the fall, which is always when it tends to get bit, you can still feel it. And being that it's such a short lift on it, usually about time you crank and lift or retrieve the slack in the line and you go to pull up, they're already on it. So that makes it a lot easier with not missing the hook set. Now, the one that I'm going to lift a little bit higher than that is going to be a Daracoup or a Little George, basically a tail spinner. That one is going to be between a foot and a foot and a half lift. Same way, you're going to basically pull it up and let it fall. Pull it up and let it fall. And the same thing, they're going to smack it as it's dropping. That blade's back here thumping as it's falling. Take up the slack as it's falling and just keep a little bit of a bow in your line. And you're going to see that line either jump or you're going to feel that tick. When it happens, reel up very quickly and set the hook. And you're going to catch them most of the time right in the front lip. The third technique for those fish that are down on bottom, and this is one that I'll throw all winter long, this same style technique is a little 2.8, like high-tech style, that's a little Dirty Jigs guppy head, and I think that's a 1/4 ounce. But basically, even all the way out in like 25 foot of water, doesn't matter if I'm in 8 foot or 25 foot, I'm going to work it the same way. I'm going to throw it out and let it get all the way to the bottom, and I'm going to worm it. And when I say worm it, in other words, I'm not reeling. I'm going to pull it slowly, and I'm going to reel up my slack. I'm going to pull it slowly and reel up my slack. When I do that, basically they hit it while it's lifting, because what happens is even though you're worming it and you're trying to keep it in bottom contact, it's still lifting up a little bit off the bottom. And it comes up just high enough for them to be able to just basically run up behind it and hit it. And you're going to feel the slightest little tick when that happens. Sometimes the bait's just gone. And when it happens, again, reel in before you actually set the hook. If you just swing, a lot of times you're not going to make contact with that fish because they're coming at you until you get to the top of your swing, and you're not going to have enough actual momentum at that point to drive the hook in. A lot of these fish that are biting that's a little bitty hook, and a lot of these fish are big quality, fish. A lot of them are in that 4 to 6 pound range, and with that hard bone around their mouth, that little bitty hook, you want to be able to get them not on that bone, but actually deep in their mouth. And the only way to do that is basically to take up that slack before they get a chance to realize that it's not real and start to spit it, and hit them very, very solid. Even though it's a light wire hook, your fluorocarbon's going to have stretch in it this time of year. I don't typically throw that on a braid leader. I'm going to throw that straight fluoro, even in the dead of winter. And it's going to have stretch in the line. So at 25 feet deep, I'm not worried about breaking off, from swinging. And not only that, but that is a light action rod that's on. It's like a medium action rod for that light hook, and that stretching that line, it tends to work out just right. I've never had an issue with stretching the hook out on that. So stick with a medium action rod with that one, you'll be just fine. The only other thing that I've been doing has been up still shallow. Like I said, the vast majority of these fish are moving out. For the fish that are resident fish in the backs of these pockets and on these flats, you will have resident fish that will remain there throughout the winter. And what they're going to do is they're going to make minor adjustments themselves as to where they're locating themselves on these flats, and as well as their forage base, because right now their shad forage base is leaving. The bluegill forage base is right behind them, because they too are taking advantage of the small forage that's been up there, and a lot of the bluegill are going to be leaving as well. So that being the case, a lot of them are going to be transitioning over to crawfish. And there's a little bit of knowledge that goes a long ways with helping you with that through the winter time, and that is a 3/4 ounce or 5/8 ounce Spro Ruku shad in that craw pattern. Right now I'm able to throw that and still work those deeper grass relatively easy. I can still, get it down in the grass and rip it free and get that reaction strike. But what happens is these big crawfish, they're actually fixing to hibernate. When we hit around 50 degrees in the water column, the larger crawfish are going to go and they're going to hibernate. They're going to tuck away for winter, and they won't come back out until that water temperature climbs back up above about 52 degrees. And what happens is your small crawfish, they remain out. They stay out all winter long, and that's the reason why going down to, a little bitsy bug jig becomes a very good pattern as well in the winter time. That's one actually that I didn't utilize, but probably as winter gets here, that will be something that I'll be using as well, as a little micro jig. But the reason those micro jigs work is because those small crawfish are the only ones that are out, and that's the natural forage base of these fish that are feeding on these grass flats. They're going to remain around the clumps of thicker hydrilla, milfoil, coontail, and sago. If you know where these clumps of thicker grass are in some of these areas, that's where you're going to find these fish that will remain during winter. Now, that being the case, you really want to find that adjacent to some sort of hard bottom, a little recess, whether it be a little minor creek channel, a little drain, a little hole, or whatever that situation is on that specific flat or area. They're going to be around those type of depressions and things like that, along with those grass clumps. So when you find that, that's what you're looking for. Get that bait into that grass and rip it out. But instead of throwing that 3/4 going in the winter, you're now going to downsize. You're going to go to the 1/2 ounce and then all the way down to the 1/4 ounce. Throughout winter, I'll be throwing nothing but primarily a 1/4 ounce. If I'm out deeper and I need to get the bait down a hair more, I might go to a 1/2 ounce. But that small profile during the winter time is going to be the key, just due to the fact that those yearling crawfish are the ones that are out during that wintertime period. Now, that said, crawfish in general molt. The yearlings molt every single month, and they're molting on the full moon. So that period around the full moon, if you ever notice that fishing a jig gets better during that time period, that's the reason why. The eyes start to haze over as the shell starts to release from the crawfish, and they're fixing to kind of expel themselves from their old shell. When that happens, they can't see very clearly, and the bass can take advantage of them and feed a lot easier. So fishing crawfish patterns, whether it be a jig or lipless or anything like that, you'll notice an uptick around that full moon phase. Now, the adult crawfish molt twice a year. They're going to molt once in the spring and once in the fall. Usually it's fairly close to that spring equinox. The other thing that the adults do as soon as they come out of hibernation around 52 degrees is they go to breeding mode. They're going to want to be able to do their spawn, and when that happens, they come out in large numbers. And that's the reason why that red craw becomes so deadly in the spring, is because now these fish are seeing large numbers of crawfish where they had not been before. And you've got fish moving from deeper water now coming into the shallows to get ready for their spawn, and they're going to move in there and feed up, and that's what they're going to be feeding on, is crawfish. And that in itself is one of the reasons why that crawfish pattern works so well in the springtime. It's not 100% that, oh, well, all your crawfish are red in the lake. That's not the case. If you set a crawfish trap out and you actually catch them, it's more so to the region of the country that you're in, based on their color and what their forage base is. That's like the blue on their claws is actually from vitamin A, from them eating grass. It's the vitamin A that they actually obtain from eating the grass that turns their craw pinchers blue. I've done a lot of research in crawfish, especially for the southeast, and the type of forage that they eat and the colors that they are. And a lot of the ones around here remain in that kind of like watermelon to green pumpkin color throughout the year. So it's not necessarily, oh, well, they're red. We tend to actually see more red on this lake in the dead of summer. And everybody stops throwing red, which is crazy to me, but it tends to be the case. So we tend to actually see our red crawfish here summertime, not in the winter. But the red still works. The reason for that is watercolor. It tends to get dirtier in the spring with the spring rains. We get a lot of rain during wintertime as well. But just in the fact that crawfish in general are up there in those shallows, and this is a bold color, and they like bold colors in the spring. So definitely keep that in mind as you go through wintertime. Make those adjustments from size as it gets colder, downsize it. When the spring comes and they start to come out, you notice at 52-degree water temperature, you know that they're coming out from hibernation. Your adults now are back up there. They're going to be out basically looking to breed and spawn, and the bass are going to be up there basically foraging on them. And that's the reason why around February and that first part of March that lipless bite gets so good. And then as we get into the middle of March, you'll notice that it starts to taper off a little bit until we get all the way up to our bass spawn. That's primarily everything that I've got for this week. So not a lot has changed from last week to this week. It's just the location of the fish. So again, from the main lake to that first third of the creek, if you were going into the creek, is primarily where the vast majority of the bait and the bass are currently at on the lake. So if you make your adjustments to those locations and utilize some of the lures that we talked about today, I think you'll have success. But hopefully that helps you guys out. And until next week, tight lines.